charge?
We're all in
We're all in
charge.
charge.
Okay, I should have known.
This is the leadership. We have shared leadership school of shared power.
Okay.
I guess I'll go first. Looking back on your life, there were obviously a lot of turning points, and at those turning points, there were obviously paths not taken. What were some of the most difficult decisions that you've had to make, and in hindsight, do you have any regrets, and would you have done anything differently?
Well, yeah, the first decision was to go to West Point, and that, you know, that, but I really wasn't a decision on my part. You know, from the time my dad went to West Point, I graduated in 1917, and always attributed every bit of success he had, and he was very successful with the New Jersey State Police and the Lindbergh kidnapping case and all this sort of thing. But he always attributed all his success to West Point. So the day I was born, you know, it was this boy is going to West Point. It was just sort of it. And I heard that all of my life. So really, you know, I went to Bordentown Military Institute when I was just a little. My dad was overseas, and I was living at home with my two sisters and my mother, and I wanted to get out of that all-female house, you know. And so I went to, but I was there for 1 year. I guess it was 6th grade or something like that. And then I traveled all over the world with my dad, but ended up at Valley Forge Military Academy again on a football scholarship, which is what I thought I was there for. But my dad had very much in mind. And so there was never any question, you know, I was going to go to West Point, and that certainly was a major turning point in my life that I really didn't have much choice over. But West Point gave me the foundation, sort of the ethical framework in which I ended up living my entire life and still live my life today. You know, the concept of duty, honor, and country, so that was number one. Now, when I graduated from West Point, I had a 3-year obligation that I had to serve, and I really hadn't decided to stay in the Army. You know, my attitude was, geez, I'm going to get out, I'm going to do my 3 years, and then at the end of 3 years, I'll make a decision as to whether I want to stay or not. And at the end of the 3 years, I had orders to Berlin, Germany. This was a very exciting place to be assigned, so I went over to Berlin for 2 years, and had 2 wonderful years in Berlin. Came back, was in the career course at Fort Benning, was thinking about maybe, you know, getting out at that time, and then they sent me to University of Southern California for 2 years to get a graduate degree, and where in essence I was a civilian. I mean, I didn't wear a uniform for 2 years and went to school, and then I was because of that I was scheduled to go back to West Point. And now in the meantime, I got back to West Point and I got promoted, ahead of all of my peer group. So I was, although I was a member of the class of '56, I got promoted over everybody in '56 and over everybody in the class of '55 who had preceded me, and I was ended up, you know, sort of at the tail end of '54. Well, that sort of becomes a, you know, when you are very successful at something, and that was the first true measure of success, when you got selected in what was known as the secondary zone, below the zone, to get promoted. You know, that was a happened to very few people in any year group, so that automatically sort of jettisons you up to the top 5% of all your peers. Then it becomes difficult to get out because now you're successful. Okay. Now, I will confess to you that there were several times in my career when I reached a point where I thought I should go down path A. And for one reason or another, I was forced down path B. And at the time, just thought it was the worst thing in the world that ever happened to me. But in hindsight, when I look back, had I gone down path A, I never would have ended up where I ended up. Never would have. So it's almost, you know, I don't want to be fatalistic about it. You know, that's not the right way to be. But it's almost as if there was some guiding hand out there that said, you know, Schwarzkopf's going down B whether he likes it or not. The one time I can think of, I was in the Pentagon, and Gerald Ford was the vice president, and had just become the vice president, and they were looking for a military assistant to the vice president, and I was nominated, the one person that was nominated by the Department of the Army to go over there and become Gerald Ford's military assistant. Now, the guy that had been the military assistant before Gerald Ford had gone in there as a lieutenant colonel and came out as a 2-star general. You know, and so so when they said, you know, well, we're gonna nominate you to go over and be the military assistant to Gerald Ford, I just thought that was wonderful, you know, for all the wrong reasons, And what happened is I went over there and I was interviewed and everything else, and I find out later that I was never under consideration. That, yeah, the Department of the Army sent me over there as their #1 candidate, but there was another guy who was very politically connected, and he had gone through all of his political connections, and he had long since been, through Melvin Laird actually, he had long since been the guy that was picked to this job. But because the Army had nominated me, the White House felt like they had to go through this selection procedure, and so they were jerking me around sort of like a beauty contest. And where I didn't have a chance of winning to begin with, you know. But I didn't know that at the time. I was too naive to understand that. And when I was, quote, not selected, I mean, I was heartbroken. I was destroyed by the fact that I was not selected. And then I had had a lot of surgery on my back and this sort of thing. And at one time, I was below the zone promotions were coming around to full colonel. And everybody was convinced that I was going to be promoted to full colonel, again, ahead of everybody else. As a matter of fact, I had been called up and offered jobs as a full colonel. And at the time, I had said to them, well, you know, I'm not a full colonel. Oh, well, that doesn't make a difference. You're definitely going to be on this next promotion list. Well, I wasn't. And I mean, I was very surprised by that, and I was very disappointed by that. And then the next year, the promotion list again, I was in the second to be considered, and everybody was absolutely convinced that I was now going to be promoted ahead, and I wasn't. And at that time, that was probably one of the bitterest moments of my entire career, because you know, I had done, quote, everything that you were supposed to do. I had virtually a perfect record, and yet I was not selected. And frankly, the one guy on the board that had dominated the board in these selections had picked a whole bunch of people that had worked for him, and he had asked me to go to work for him, and I turned him down. And you know, so there was a little bit of vindictiveness there, and I was really wiped out by that. But because of that, okay, let me back off. I had gone to Washington, D.C. out of the War College because everybody had said, you need to go to Washington, D.C. to get your ticket punched. I had never done ticket punching up until that time. You know, what I mean by ticket punching, in other words, you've got to, these are the key jobs if you want to get ahead, and you must have held all these positions. And I never paid attention to that. I went to Washington, D.C. because I had never served on, quote, a high-level staff in Washington, and I was selected to be the military assistant to the Assistant Secretary of the Army Financial Management, and because it was an Army staff position, it was a high mucking, you know, and get all this great visibility and everything else. And everybody said the only reason why you weren't selected last time was because you hadn't had high-level Department of Army staff. So I had gone, I had done that, I had these great efficiency reports, then I wasn't selected again. Okay, and that's when I realized that, hey, wait a minute, you're going about this thing all wrong. You know, why are you out there doing these things that you don't enjoy doing? Why are you doing that? You're doing it for all the wrong reasons. You're doing it to get ahead. You're doing it to get promoted. You're not doing it because that's where you can do the best job. And then this job came open in Alaska, which was a command job that nobody else wanted because it was working for one of the biggest SOBs in the whole United States Army. And I went down and volunteered for the job. And everybody thought that was crazy. Everybody thought, they literally thought, okay, because he has not been promoted the second time, he's giving up. He's checking out of the net. He is discarding Washington. He's running off to Alaska, you see. And that wasn't what I was doing. I was doing it because I was very unhappy in Washington and this staff job that I really wasn't qualified for. The only reason why I'd taken the dumb job was because everybody said I had to do it to get promoted. And I suddenly realized that, hey, you know, everybody around me is walking around with long faces and they're unhappy and they hate Washington, D.C. and they hate working here. Matter of fact, a friend of mine wrote an article called Winners Lose. And the whole foundation of the article was, if you're a winner, if you're really doing well in the Army, you get assigned to Washington where you're treated terribly. So anyhow, to make a long story short, I went to Alaska and everybody else thought I was crazy and had literally checked out of the net. You know, and because of my disappointment with not getting the vice president's job, my disappointment not getting promoted and everything like that, I had quit, and it was just exactly the opposite. What I had realized is, hey, you know, do what your heart tells you to do. Do what you know you can do well, okay? And quality of life, you know, your ability to serve is so much more important than you're getting promoted or anything like that. I mean, but as I say, if I look back, if I had gotten a vice presidential job, I never would have ended up where I ended up. If I had been promoted to colonel, I never would have ended up where I ended up. It was the big move of my life is when I, as a lieutenant colonel on the promotion list to colonel, decided to go to Alaska and command in Alaska. And I went to Alaska, I commanded there for 2 years. Then I went to Washington State, commanded there for 2 years. And when the first time they looked at me for brigadier general, I was the only colonel in the whole Army that had 4 solid years of commanding troops. And I was promoted over everybody to brigadier general. So you know, the moral of the story is I think that, you know, don't cry over spilled milk. If you get to the point where you think you ought to be going down path A and you go down path B and say, well, that's it. You know, don't worry about path A anymore. Just go ahead and do your very best. When I went to work for this brigadier general, who was the biggest SOB in the Army, everybody said, oh my God, you know, we really pity you. And I said, hey, I'm not worried about that. I said, what I'm going to do is do what I always do. I'm going to go in there and do the best possible job I can do. And I can't do any more than that. So if he's not satisfied with that, that's his problem. That's not my problem, okay? As long as I know I'm doing the best I can possibly do, then if he's not satisfied with that, he's the guy that's got the problem. And that's the way I approached the guy. And it turned out to be a wonderful relationship. And he was tough. He was very tough. But you know, it all had a great payoff. That's a very long answer to a short question. But I hope I framed, you know, what it is I'm trying to say.
It's interesting that in the military, it seems like there's a conflicting emphasis on one getting promoted, but then on the other hand, it's doing your best job and commanding it. It's like
well, it's one of the things that's wrong with the military, I think, because there are gates out there, and you have to go through the gates if you're going to have a future career. You know what I mean? There's the Command and General Staff College is one, for instance. If you don't go to the Command and General Staff College, then you are already limited. If you're an infantryman, for instance, and you don't get to command at the lieutenant colonel level of battalion, if you don't get to command at the brigade level, then your chances of getting promoted to, you know, beyond that are absolutely zip. They're not there. So you can take it, but the other side of that coin is, of course, those jobs are very limited. You know, there's not very many of them. So you send a message to people, I think, very early that, okay, you don't command a battalion, you might just well retire in 20 years, get out, go do something else. That's good and that's bad. It's bad because it limits the motivation of the individuals, unless they're extraordinarily dedicated people. Okay, it limits their motivation to serve. On the other hand, you know, you're not dangling a carrot in front of their nose for an impossible accomplishment. In other words, it used to be that when I was in the personnel business, you know, the rule was you never say never. You know, don't ever tell anybody never. It turns wrong. I used to tell them never all the time because I didn't feel it was fair for you to come in for counseling on your career. Gee, Schwarzkopf, how do I enhance my career to get ahead? And you'd open up the book, and there was no career. You know, I mean, they weren't going to go anywhere. You know, I would not lie to them. I'd just say, look, you know, you served your country very well. You've done great up until this point, but given the competition that you're faced with and where they're going and what you've done to date, you know, you're not going to go any further. And then let them make the decision as to what they want to do. So, but you know, I preach this in my leadership lesson. If you are in the leadership game only for the next tangible reward, okay, if you're in it for the next promotion, the next pay raise, the next title change, the next citation, the next medal, or whatever, you are doomed to disappointment. Doomed. Because we live in this pyramidal society, and we all enter down here. But as you go through life, as you move up on the pyramid, it gets narrower and narrower and narrower. And eventually, everyone gets knocked off the pyramid. I mean, even if you make CEO, chairman of the board, you're still going to get knocked off one of these days by your age, if nothing else. And so, if the only reason why you're in the leadership business is for the next tangible reward, okay, you're doomed to leave unhappy. I can't tell you how many people I have seen make 3-star general in the military. Now, to make 3-star general, you are in the top 1%, probably more than that. You're in the top 1/2 of 1% of all of your peer group that entered. And you entered, in a peer group of maybe 10,000 people, and you are in the top 1/2 of 1% of that 10,000 people. And I've seen people reach 3 stars and not get promoted to 4 stars and leave bitter and disappointed, which is crazy. I mean, it's crazy. So the secret is you have to understand that the rewards of leadership come from leadership itself. That's where, it comes from the challenges of leadership and the fulfillment that you get through leadership. And if you truly understand that, then the day you get knocked off the pyramid, if you look back and say, boy, we had a great team. We did good stuff together. I'm really proud of what we did. You'll carry that, it'll warm your heart for the rest of your days. But if you're focused on the next promotion or something like that, you're in trouble. You're already in trouble because eventually you're not going to make it.
If all our eyes, military and civilian, were on you right now as a public figure, would you still consider yourself a leader?
Sure. Yeah, I was a leader when I was at West Point, and I got selected to be the company commander of my company at West Point. There was 100 college students, and I was the guy who was selected to be in charge of them. And I was a leader. There was no question about that. And my first outfit in the Army was a platoon of 40 men, and I felt very good about the fact that I could lead them and that they respected me as a leader and followed me. So there's leaders at all levels, and just because you end up in the public eye, there's a lot of magnificent leaders out there that will never appear in the public eye. And I like to think that I was a good leader long before the public ever discovered me. If I hadn't been, I never would have ended up where I was. Leadership is very much a state of mind in some ways. Okay, it really is. And even when I was in a lousy staff job, where the only thing I was leading was my desk, deep in my heart, I knew I could do better than that as far as being a leader.
After reading your autobiography, we noticed that you made reference to the term natural leader. Could you elaborate what you meant by this and why?
By natural leader, I don't mean born leader. I don't think anybody's a born leader. I think that basically, the great leaders, the people in the history who have a reputation of being great leaders, were really rather ordinary people who were suddenly thrust into extraordinary circumstances. And because they had prepared themselves, were able to meet the crisis or assume the mantle of leadership at a critical time, and therefore they became known as great leaders. But I don't think the circumstances of your birth have anything to do with leadership. But there are some people who feel very comfortable in the role of leader. There are other people who are very good leaders, or who are leaders, who never really feel comfortable with the role. They're thrust into it, and they accomplish great things in that role, but they never really were, they never really felt comfortable in what they're doing. Let me give you a good example, regardless of your politics. Jimmy Carter and Ronald Reagan. Now, Jimmy Carter was a guy who never really quite came to grips with, he was the president, yes, but he never really quite came to grips as a national leader, and was always sort of appeared uncomfortable in that role. Okay? And yet you got Ronald Reagan, who was a movie actor, who walked in there, and today you still got people out there that would kill for Ronald Reagan. They absolutely think that Ronald Reagan hung the moon. Okay? Because he was always appeared very comfortable in his role of leader. He just projected an image to the people that he was leading that he was the leader, and that's really more what I mean about a natural leader than I'm not saying that because, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that Jimmy Carter wasn't a good leader. He did great things as president. He accomplished an awful lot of wonderful stuff, but he never really quite quite appeared, you know, to be comfortable himself in his role, in his leadership role. That's really more what I'm talking about when I talk about a natural leader. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah. Clarifies a lot.
In the class that we're taking right now, Leading Individuals, for the entire first half of the semester, we pretty much focused on coming back to ourselves, where we come from, and who we are. In the role that you are in, how do you separate General H. Norman Schwarzkopf from Norman Schwarzkopf? And in other words, how do you find time for yourself, and what sort of things do you do at that time?
It is very difficult, unfortunately, okay, to separate General Schwarzkopf from H. Norman Schwarzkopf anymore. I've almost become public property, and therefore, anywhere you go, private life is virtually non-existent anymore for me. That's good and that's bad. I mean, I certainly have more fame and more fortune than I ever expected to have in my entire life, and because of that fame and notoriety more than anything else, I am able to do and accomplish things, good stuff that I never ever expected to be able to do, and that's why I'm involved with so many charities and so many fundraising events and that sort of thing. And really, you get a great warm feeling by being able to do that. But every now and then, you just, I mean, I can't go to a movie because you walk into the movie theater, and I can't fly on chartered airline. I mean, I'm on chartered commercial airlines. So I walk into the airline terminal and I get attacked, and then I get in the airplane and I get attacked isn't the right word, but I mean, you know, people come up with me. I don't go out to dinner to restaurants. If I do go out to dinner, it has to be a restaurant where I call up ahead of time and get a private room someplace. And so your private life, you lose it very quickly. Now, don't get me wrong, I still do a lot of stuff, but my thing is I love the wilderness, okay, and so my thing is to go to Alaska and then go to a lodge a friend of mine owns where he has a plane, and that plane flies me out in the middle of nowhere and drops me off, and I fish all day long. You see, there's nothing out there. I mean, very seldom does a caribou ever come up to me and ask for my and it's terrible to say, but it's escapism. That's what it is. I have built a log home out in Telluride, Colorado. I picked Telluride because Telluride is so hard to get to. You know, it's a ski resort because I love to ski and my kids love to ski and I want to be near a ski resort. But I picked Telluride because it's not Aspen, it's not Vail, it's not glitz, it's not glamour, it's not. Secondly, when I built this place, there's a very fancy area where all the mansions are built and everything like that. I didn't build there at all. I went to the top of a mountain. It takes a dirt road to get up there. It's hidden back in the trees, and I don't tell anybody where it is, and I don't want anybody to come there because it's escapism. And I go out there and I hike in the mountains by myself, and I go fishing and that sort of thing. And it's a deliberate attempt to get away from it, you know, to reestablish a private life. But let me back off from that. A long time ago, I was giving a lecture at West Point. I was a colonel at the time, and the cadets like to ask you questions that are impossible to answer. You know, they like to think they really put you in a trick box, you know. And I was giving a lecture on duty, and at the end of this whole thing, this one cadet got up and said, "Well, Colonel, I noticed that you're married. You know, what do you do when you have a conflict between your duty as an officer and your duty to your family?" And I said to him, hey, I knew the answer right away. I said, look, you know, I'll be very candid with you. First of all, I've never run into that situation, okay? I think that's grossly overblown, you know, but I said, if I ever ran into a time when I had to choose between the military and my family, there's no question when I do, I choose my family, immediately. Because any leader worth his salt is training his subordinates to take his place, his or her place, okay? Anybody worth his salt does that. One of your principal responsibilities as a leader is to develop your subordinates, okay? So So in any organization, if you've done that, you can step aside and you know somebody else will step in and fill your shoes. But there is nobody to step in and fill your shoes if you step aside with your family. You're it. And so therefore I said, if I had to make that choice, the choice would be simple. One of the rules I had from about the time I was a colonel on is on my desk I had an inbox and outbox like everybody else does. And I also had what I call a hot box. And I would say to my staff, look, if there's anything that's so important that I must deal with it today, put it in the hot box. And I will guarantee you, I will promise you, that I will look at whatever it is in the hot box before I go home at night. Now, I might look at it and say, they think it's important, I don't think it's that important. But I would promise them that I would always look at it before I would go home at night. But I would say, but I will never take papers home at night. Because when I leave this office, I may have to stay there till 8 o'clock at night. When I leave this office and I get home, I belong to my family, okay? And I would never do it. Now, I took a job as I was the Deputy Chief of Staff for Operations in the Army, considered the toughest job in the entire United States Army. My predecessor would carry 2 briefcases full of work home every single night. And I mean, he would go in the door, have supper, go in and lock himself in his study and go through all his papers and everything like that. I never carried one paper home, not one. Because, you know, it really is you know, you've got to have your priorities straight. You got to understand that, hey, you know, when I'm on duty, yeah, I'm on duty, but I also have a responsibility to a wife. I have a responsibility to my children, to be a father to them. You know, in this business about, you know, all work and no play makes Johnny a dull boy is really true. It really is true. And so and one other point on that. My dad was a general. Okay, my dad ended up as a 2-star general. But I saw the day come when my father took off his uniform and he was no longer a 2-star general. And even in the neighborhood, okay, before long he wasn't called general anymore. And certainly to the world he wasn't called general anymore. And so I always knew that there was a finite end to being a general. I always knew the day would come when I would take off my uniform and I would be something else. And a lot of my contemporaries never quite understood that, okay? I mean, as far as they were concerned, they were always going to be a general. Many of them today have long since retired and they're still in Washington, D.C., running around, you know, prostituting themselves, you know, working for think tanks and using, you know, as former generals. I mean, they just can't give it up. I always knew, because of what I'd been through with my father, that that day would come when I would no longer be a general. So I didn't really get so hung up on being a general that I couldn't walk away and leave it. And I always made sure I had a private life. You don't have as much of it sometimes as you'd want, but I think it's just so important for your concept as a whole being, a whole person, to make sure you do that, to make sure that no matter what job you have, that you have your work life, you have your leadership role or whatever it is, but you also have to have a dimension of private life. And if you don't, I have a classmate of mine, and I won't tell you his name, but the guy was West Point classmate. He wanted to be #1 in the class. He wasn't #1, but he was like #3 or #4. Academically, he was #2 or 3. Militarily, I mean, his dad was a 4-star general, and this guy he got promoted every step of the way ahead of everybody else, and this sort of thing. I mean, just absolutely, you know, taking off like a rocket in his career progression and everything else. He and I were brigadier generals together in Germany, and we were both assistant division commanders for a division in Germany. And Germany was wonderful, you know, wonderful. But every time I was ever around this guy in a social setting, he was talking about work. I mean, and when you went over to his house for dinner, all you heard about was work and this program and that program and that. And at 2 o'clock in the morning, you were sitting there, you know, this guy still wanted to talk about work. And I said to him one time, I said, Rick, for God's sake, you know, just one time, one time, I would like to hear you talk about football or about girls or something, you know, science or anything, you know, and this guy, 100%, he laughed and just went right on talking about it. Okay? And I mean, he had become one-dimensional, is what it had become, and I mean, he was a social bore. And what happened was eventually, the guy got promoted to 3 stars, but he never got promoted to 4 stars. Because he was unidimensional. I mean, the guy had lost he lost the big picture. You know, he was focused like a laser beam. And in a time when, you know, the term general means just that. You were supposed to be a generalist. You're not supposed to be a specialist. And so it's important, I think, really important for anybody, particularly you all, you know, starting out, to always have other interests. You know, it may be music, it may be reading, it may be shows, it may be sports, it may be, you know, fishing and hunting, and whatever. But have something else in your life besides your work, okay? Or you're going to suffer burnout. What's going to happen? Next question.
What about the future? What would your ideal future from now on be?
I'm sort of living my ideal future right now. As I say, I have this wonderful opportunity to do good stuff that I've never had before. And as a result, let me give you an example. I like to shoot a shotgun, and I like a game called Sporting Clays, where you go out and it's kind of a golf course for shotgun shooter and this sort of thing. Once a year, I hold a competition down in Florida called the Schwarzkopf Cup. I bring in 100 of the top CEOs across the country, okay? And they come in on Thursday afternoon, and they practice a little bit on Thursday, they practice a little bit on Friday, we shoot for record on Friday afternoon, and then we shoot for record on Saturday. But what we're gonna do is have a good time. I mean, the Thursday night, we kid each other, a lot of side bets are made. Friday night, I get all the team captains to stand up and tell me why they did so poorly that day. We harass them. We all wear cowboy, we dress up in Western clothes and have a big banquet barbecue under a tent on Friday evening, have a bluegrass band playing in the background, and then Saturday, we shoot the competition. Saturday night, we have a big banquet and hand out a lot of medals and guns and this sort of thing. Okay. By doing that, okay, in 5 years, I have raised $2.5 million for the Miami project to cure spinal paralysis. One weekend a year. Last year, we netted $700,000. One weekend. Okay. Okay. Now, you think that if it was called the Jones Cup, that anybody would be coming? No, you know, they come because of me, and I am able to. Remington donates all the ammunition for free, all the targets for free. Remington gives me 5 or 6 guns to give away. Beretta gives me 5 or 6 guns to give away as prizes. I get cut. You know, we give goodie bags when they arrive. These guys pay $5,000 a piece to come to this thing, but when they come, we give them a big goodie bag, and it's got all sorts of good stuff in it, but all of it is given to me for free or a deep discount or something like that. Now, I couldn't do that. Okay, I couldn't do that before, but today I can use my name or I can use my influence to do stuff like that, and that's why Paul Newman, you know, we've opened a camp in North Orlando, Florida for chronically ill children. He's got his home law gang camp up in Connecticut. I don't know if you've heard about it, but in Connecticut they're limited by the weather, so they can only stay open for X number of months or weeks actually, and then they have to close. And because of that, he wanted to open a camp in Florida. So he came to me, and I'm the co-founder of a big camp that we have down there now that we put 1,500 kids through last summer, and last summer was the first full-blown summer, where we bring kids in with all sorts of illnesses. And cancer, we have kids come in for a 2-week session that have terrible cancer and have to have chemotherapy every day and that sort of thing. But when they're not doing that, it's the only chance they have to really be normal kids. And we have HIV/AIDS kids in, we have kids with heart problems, we have kids with asthma, and when they come in, we have a full-blown medical facility. We bring in a full-blown medical staff that can take care of that particular need. And yet the rest of the time they're fishing. We have kids that, you know, you can't tell you how many of them caught their first fish, you know, and that's one of the things I insist on. I want fishing. Okay, and we make them, we don't make them do it, but, you know, I have this wonderful picture of this little boy kissing a fish, you know, because I tell him, you know, two things to be a successful fisherman. First of all, you gotta spit on your hook, and secondly, you gotta kiss the fish, you know, so you send it back, and it tells all the other fish. So I have this little boy going, I guess kissing the whole fish, it's about it. But I had a letter from a woman the other day who just gratuitously talked about her son who had very bad asthma, who was never allowed to play, couldn't go out with the other kids, as a result had very low self-esteem and this sort of thing. And he went to the camp, and she said, we dropped him off as a little boy, and we picked him up as a young man. Because he was able, for the first time in his life, to be a normal kid, to do all the stuff that other kids could do at the camp and that sort of thing. And she just said, you know, wrote me a letter to say thank you. That's, you know, that makes you feel good. And so, you know, I will be very happy doing that for the rest of my life, being able to serve causes that I would never have been able to serve before, and to do good stuff. And that's, you know, let's face it, would I be sitting here talking to you all today if my name was Smith? No. Yeah, but I can come up here and I can spend a day with you all and talk to you, and you know, and you listen to me. I mean, if there's some guy, Joe Smith, was sitting here, I'm not sure you'd be listening to him right now, you know. So it's a wonderful opportunity for me to be able to do that.
One time, a professor here, Hoyle in business, told me I was doing an interview with him, and we were giving him an award for great community service, and he said, you know what, Reagan, he goes, do good stuff first, worry about saving the world later. And it really sounds like, and that's something that's been a value of mine, and he really said that, and that's one of my guiding values. And so, and we were thinking about values and what's important, and I was just wondering if you could just briefly give us a couple of your core set of values. We were asked to write ours down, which is a hard thing to do. But if you've thought about that and what has guided you.
I went to school called the Center for Creative Leadership, okay? And it was a wonderful experience. I really enjoyed it there. It was in Greensboro, North Carolina, and I really enjoyed it. But one of the exercises they had was after we had been through about a week of the school or something like that, they said, okay, now we want you to sit down, we're gonna give you an hour to write down your core values, the values by which you'd like to live the rest of your life. Took me 1 minute. I was done. Okay. Duty, honor, country. Okay. Duty. Robert E. Lee said, duty is the sublimest. What did I say? The sublimest concept of them all. Okay. But the sense of duty, the sense of giving of yourself, the sense of owing an obligation to something other than obligation to serve, to something beyond yourself, okay, to me is the core value of should be the core value of all of us, okay, selfless service, okay, and I'll come back to that in a minute. And then secondly, doing it with honor, okay, being able to do your duty in the service of your country, but being able to do it honorably, with honor, with integrity. You know, I feel sorry for people who live a lie, okay? Because it's always going to trap them eventually. It really is, and I've learned the hard way in many cases that you know, if you don't lie, you're never going to get caught lying. Just that simple, okay? And you're going to be consistent. And you know, a lot of people did not like some of the stuff I wrote in here. They wanted me to lie. I couldn't do that. Because if I had lied in that book would be worthless. Absolutely worthless. As it is, hopefully, it will help others in the future to become leaders or to make decisions or to make sure we didn't make the same mistakes we made in the past. But if you lie, you know, it's worthless. And number one, it's worthless. And number two, I'm not too sure I'm smart enough to keep my story straight that long. That became my core value, okay, duty, honor, country, and that sort of is what has driven my life, okay. Now, there's a reward to that. When I look back over my life, the time I have absolutely, without any question, been the happiest is when I was doing something from which I was gonna gain absolutely nothing tangible. Absolutely nothing tangible. My first tour in Vietnam, I was an advisor to the Vietnamese, okay? I was, getting shot at, I got wounded, I was out in the middle of the jungle, we didn't have any food, I slept where they slept, I ate what they ate, I ate the same food they did, I lost all sorts of weight, I got a couple of exotic diseases. I stood to gain nothing personally from that experience. Nothing. And yet it was one of the happiest times of my entire life. Because it was truly 100% selfless service to a cause. Selfless. Totally selfless. And that's why people like Mother Teresa don't surprise me. I mean, they don't surprise me at all. I'm sure that Mother Teresa had just unbelievable happiness in her soul, inside herself, okay, because she had totally given of herself. That's why the Albert Schweitzers do what Albert Schweitzers do, and these are great leaders, by the way. I always use it when I challenge people, I say, what is this thing called leadership? What is this thing that defines a persona like Georgie Patton with his pearl-handled pistols, at the same time defines, Albert Schweitzer? What is it that defines Mother Teresa, but defines Margaret Thatcher with an iron will? You see, but I'm convinced that, I just wish that somehow you could bottle this and feed it to youth, you know what I mean? When you graduate from college, everybody has to take a drink of selfless service, and they would understand, how truly, truly rewarding that is, above all else. I've got just about every award you could get, okay? I've got medals at home from here to here that I've been presented over my career. I've got sashes and swords and stuff that were presented to me from all over the world. Since that time, I've been given, awards for all sorts of stuff out there, that I have. The awards that are meaningful to me? I got an award one year as Father of the Year, okay? I got another one from the Gilda Radner Society for my work with cancer, okay? I've got another award from United Cerebral Palsy as Humanitarian of the Year. That stuff is, all that other stuff is sort of isn't important anymore. Yeah, it's nice to have. I look at it and I say, what the hell am I gonna do with all this stuff, okay? What am I gonna do with all these swords? What am I gonna do with all these medals and that sort of thing? But the ones that are really, really important to me today have nothing to do with winning wars and all that sort of stuff. It's the other stuff that I'm really proud of stuff.
Let me ask you just one final question before we leave. You are someone who is definitely going to be, or has probably already been, written about in history books. Someone that, when you're in third grade, teachers are going to teach about, about who you are and what you did. How would you like to see those written? How do you want to see yourself in history books once you're gone and people can no longer talk to you like we are? How do you want to be remembered?
Well, unfortunately, history is the last guy that writes the book. And that's kind of scary, because there have been all sorts of wonderful books written about me, but there have been two terrible books, just terrible books that are flagrant lies. And yet, and I worry about that from a history standpoint, because books like that tend to be circular reinforcing. I just read an article the other day in what is supposedly a very reputable historical magazine, and some of the things that are in there that are said about me are blatantly untrue. But what this so-called professor of history has done at Ohio State is he has sucked directly out of these two bad books, certain information and put it in there about me, which isn't true. So I worry about history, okay? And I don't have a lot of confidence in history either, because, as I say, history can be the last guy that wrote the book. But if I could be remembered as anything, I would just like to be remembered as someone who served their country, okay, who placed, who placed duty above self-interest, who truly was a selfless servant. I look at my father. My father graduated from West Point in 1917. He ended up being the organizer and the first superintendent of New Jersey State Police, and served the state of New Jersey for 15 years. Then he got fired by a crooked governor. He stayed active in the National Guard. At the beginning of World War II, the National Guard got activated. My dad stayed and served in the National Guard. I didn't serve in the National Guard. Was activated and went on active duty as a lieutenant colonel, and ended up serving in Iran for 8 years. It's a long time in Iran in those days, believe me. And then eventually went back to state service, and he died when he was 63 years old, lung cancer. He was a very heavy smoker. And he died at the age of 63 after 40 years of service. When my dad died, his entire estate came to $15,000. Okay, total that was it, $15,000. And yet, he, to my mind, was one of the greatest servants of our country, because he had served not only the state of New Jersey for these many years, but he also served his country in the United States military for all these years. And you could not measure his worth upon his death by the size of his bank account. Okay, you really measured his worth by what he had contributed, the contribution he had made. Okay, now I am one hell of a lot richer than my father was. Okay, I am one hell of a lot richer than I ever thought I would be. Okay, and every now and then I kick myself and say, this is unbelievable what has happened. But that is totally unimportant to me. I mean, that just allows me to do things that I couldn't do before. And I certainly do not want to be remembered. I just turned down a job where I mean, I can't tell you how many things I've turned down where their appeal to me was buckets of money. They come in, I said, look, when I decided to stay in the Army a long time ago, I decided I'm never going to be rich, so money is not important to me. Yeah, it's nice to have, but it really isn't important. And that old adage of, boy, I learned the hard way, I mean, in the past few years, that old adage that money won't buy you happiness, that's so true. I mean, absolutely true. But anyhow, I think the worth of a human being is not in what they accumulate. The worth of a human being is how they serve and what they serve. And so I would be very happy to be. I told Barbara Walter this, and I meant it. And I said, if on my tombstone that they would have put down, he loved his family, and he loved his troops, and they loved him. Period. That's enough. That's enough. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Well, I hope you got something out of it.
Yes.
You want me to sign your books?
Yes,
Yes,
sir.
please.
No, that's not.
Ta-da, you're back ready.
Well, we certainly appreciate you taking the time.
This was incredible. Thank you very much.
You ever been to Lake Iliamna,
Huh?
Alaska?
Oh, yeah. Have you been to Lake Iliamna?
I lived there for 2 years.
Where?
We lived outside Anchorage. My dad was there.
Oh, yeah, sure. Well, you lived, I was at Fort Richardson, so you were at Elmendorf, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You ever go back?
We're
Not
going to,
yet.
we're gonna take a trip.
You gotta take your dad back. My
Huh?
dad needs to go back. He needs to
You,
go
oh,
fishing
you gotta
over
do it.
there.
I mean, that's just so incredibly beautiful, really. I went fishing up there 2 years ago and caught a trophy rainbow trout that I have hanging on my wall. I had a plastic mold made of it, 32 inches long.
God.
16 pounds. Rainbow trout. If you catch a rainbow trout in the United States of America, in the lower 48, if it's 18 inches, it's a huge rainbow.
Yeah.
It's 32 inches,
Oh,
16
God.
inches around the girth, and weighed 16 pounds. And I have a plastic mold. I also own the world's record for Dolly Varden. Most people don't know what Dolly Varden is, but Dolly Varden is a fish like a rainbow, but they follow the salmon in and out, and they come behind the salmon, they gorge on salmon eggs all summer long. And if you want to catch a trophy fish in Alaska, you go up at the end of September, just as the last salmon runs out. They've been gorging themselves on these eggs, and they're huge. Anyhow, after I caught my big rainbow, which is my attention. The guy came over and said, you know, you look like you're a pretty good fly fisherman, and we were out fishing for dollies the other day, and you were catching a lot of big ones. How would you like to try for a world record? I said, no. They said, no, really. The world record on a 2-pound test line, okay, and in fly fishing, everything depends upon the size. The world record for volley barb on a 2-pound test line was 3 pounds 4 ounces. I caught a 7-pound 2-ounce volley barb. And I am now among my other accomplishments. I'm in the International Game Fishing Association, IGFA, record book as a world record holder for dolly barb on 2-pound test line. Now, you see, aren't you
What an
impressed?
accomplishment.
But I told you there are other accomplishments out there. There is
Can I
like.
ask you another personal question?
Sure.
I hunt with my dad because I was brought up as a son, and he's always complaining, I live in a house with too many women, like you said earlier about getting out of the house with women. What do you hunt and what do you live?
I hunt.
What's your favorite?
My favorite is birds.
Me too.
Okay.
Up on game.
As a matter of fact, I'm going hunting next week. Next week I'll be hunting for pheasant, quail, and duck, and then I'm going over the second week in November to Spain, where I'm going to be shooting red-legged partridge. And but by far, because I love the shotgun sports, but that's more challenging for me. See, so I hunt quail with 28 gauge, and to me that's just the thing to do.
I have a 20 gauge because I think anything bigger would knock me over.
Yeah.
That's what my father says. He's actually hunting up
Dolly Varden.
Canada
My
right
dad
now.
fished for salmon and I fished for Dolly Varden.
Huh?
I used to sit on the bank, I had a little mini lawn chair.
And
I
when you
had a
fell in.
little baby fishing pole and I used to catch Dolly Varden while my dad and my brother went out.
They're great fish. Dolly's a great fish.
I was good too.
I tell you what, they're really fun to catch on the fly line because they give you such a good flight.
We
Yeah,
wanna
good
learn.
flight.
We want to learn how to fly fish. We talked about it this summer, but we just didn't
I
know.
did once up in Baxter State Park in Maine,
Yeah.
and it was the only kind of fishing you could do in Baxter State Park because of conservatism efforts or whatever. But my dad taught me, it was amazing, very natural. I wasn't good, I didn't catch any.
Doesn't matter if you're good as long as you enjoy it.
Yeah, as long as you.
Well, the great thing about fly fishing, you learn that about fly fishing, and it's sort of like Zen.
Is this yours, Jess?
You know, you're
Yeah.
out there in the middle of the water, and you're surrounded by glorious nature, and if you go where I go, there's nobody else there. And, you know, you're sort of doing your thing, and all of a sudden, it doesn't, you know, you're not even thinking about catching
Very
fish
cute. It's
anymore.
not.
You know, the rhythm of casting is sort of a, you know, like this. It's not frantic or anything. It's all kind of, you know, you're sort of just, everything is in balance, and it's RAE, right?
That's right.
Ashley? Sweet. We might have time for a picture or two then.
What's that?
So we might even have time for a picture.
I think we can handle that, as long as the school is up to it, it's okay with me. Jess, is that your name?
Yes, sir.
My daughter's name is Jessica.
Oh,
My
really?
daughter's name, yeah.
It's a good name to have. This is going to be a very far out question, and you probably won't know the guy's last name, but I don't remember it either. My father serves on the Commission for the Future of Clemson University, and there's a man that he's with that worked with you in Desert Storm. His name's Gene, and I don't remember his last name. And he's high up in the military.
There are 541,000 people.
I don't know. Apparently the guy talked about you, like he knew who you were and you knew who he was, and it was sort of a mutual
I don't know
friendship.
what he did over there.
I have absolutely no idea. I figured that you might know. I wish I had called my father this morning and got his
Gee.
last name.
Did somebody unplug your alarm clock?
My friends decided to stress me out this morning. They would unplug my alarm clock so I would wake up on time.
That's a lot, you never catch up, do you? Yeah, it's awful. The worst thing in the world is, you know, is the oversleep. Like jump out of bed and finally get around. The whole day, you never catch up. You just never, your whole body is just screaming. Why are you doing this to me? You know, it's stress, all right, of the Great, okay, who's got the camera?
We think there's somebody up.